I tell you a true crime story and we drink. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you choose to enjoy one of our themed margaritas, please ensure that you are of legal drinking age and have fun but drink responsibly. Welcome to our first Margs and Mayhem month of the macabre, the best month of the year. This month we have aliens, we have murder, we have witches, we have mayhem, we have margaritas. The weather is finally getting cooler, the mornings are crisp, and the evenings are perfect for a fire and a big cozy sweater and a true crime story about a guy who decided to ruin Halloween for all of us. I guess. When I was a young kid dressed as a clown or M&M or whatever mortifying thing my family dreamed up, my mom would always, I distinctly remember, give me strict instructions about safety when it came to Halloween candy. Yes, of course, I wasn't to take any apples because they would have razor blades in them. But also, I wasn't to take anything homemade, and I sure as heck had to make sure that my candy hadn't been tampered with in any way. I thought, as I normally did, that my mom was just being dramatic. Turns out this time she was basing her histrionics in facts. Love you, Mom. If you're not following on TikTok, starting this week, I'm going to start making the margaritas each week as a TikTok. It might be something that you're missing if you checked out the YouTube channel, and it's just pretty hard to describe well enough in a podcast format. I mentioned it last week, but this week's margarita involves an infused tequila. We did one of these earlier in the year when we infused with ginger, but because it's Halloween, we're going with a candy corn infused tequila. Sounds gross, right? Well, it also looks gross. It tastes pretty good though. Besides the prep work, this margarita is pretty simple. We're going to take 2 parts of our candy corn tequila, 1 part lime juice, and 1 part triple sec. Also, if you need it a little sweeter, you can do a half a part of simple syrup. We will shake in a shaker and strain over fresh ice. Since we're going straight candy, we will go ahead and use a sugar-rimmed glass for this week. Why the heck not? Ronald Clark O'Brien's background is a pretty big mystery. He was born on October 19, 1944 in Houston, Texas. His parents were William and Elsie, and he had 1 brother, Thomas. His mother was a housewife, and his father worked for the Houston Chronicle for 42 years and was a member of the Typographical Union. It appears his mom died at 40 years old of lung and cervical cancer when Ronald was only 11 years old. William remarried in 1968 when Ronald was in his 20s. Beyond that, not much is known about the background of Ronald. Ronald married his wife Daneen on November 22, 1964 when he was 20 years old. They lived in Deer Park, Texas, a suburb of Houston. Their son Timothy was born on April 5, 1966, and their daughter Elizabeth was born a few years later in 1969. Ronald worked as an optician at Texas State Optical in Sharpstown, Houston, a nearly 60-mile round-trip commute from the family home in Deer Park. Ronald sang in the choir at the Second Baptist Church, where he also served as a deacon and was in charge of the church's bus program. Tim was a 3rd-grade student at Carpenter Elementary. He loved football and basketball and was described as all boy. On Halloween night 1974, there was a steady drizzle, making for a quiet Halloween night. The rain kept many kids at home, but not the O'Brien family. Ronald, Tim, and Elizabeth joined up with a family from church, Jim Bates, and his 2 children, Mark and Kimberly. They loaded up a car and drove to the Bates' nearby, more wealthy suburb of Pasadena, Texas, in search of the better candy. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Due, in part at least I assume, to the rain, the families only ventured into a few neighborhoods before heading home. Tim was wearing a Planet of the Apes costume. Before leaving for home, the families approached a house at 4112 Donerail at the behest of Ronald, which was strange because the porch lights were off. Us Halloween pros both know about the necessity to visit more wealthy neighborhoods and the universal signal of Halloween, the lit-up porch light. Still, Ronald insisted that they go to that door. When no one answered, Ronald hung back and the others left to head to the next house. Moments later, Ronald emerged with 5 pixie sticks. Jim Bates would later say, "I never saw the door open. He came out and said, 'You've got rich neighbors. Look what they're giving out.'" And indeed, they were handing out the big 22-inch pixie sticks in the plastic tubes. Ronald held on to the tubes until they made it back to the Bates' house, where he gave one stick to each child and joked that he would take the fifth for himself. However, a few trick-or-treaters arrived at the Bates' front door, and Ronald gave the last pixie stick to one of them. All right, well, extra trigger warning because rough times lie ahead. Hopefully you made enough candy corn tequila to have a second margarita. The O'Briens headed home, and before bed, Tim asked to eat some of the candy he had collected. He chose the pixie stick. Tim, probably because he was 8, did not notice that the top of the plastic pixie stick tube had been stapled shut. He opened it, but had trouble getting the powdered candy out of the straw. You pixie stick experts will understand the struggle. Ronald helped him loosen the powder and tilted the tube so that Tim could eat the candy. After tasting the candy, Tim complained that it tasted bitter. Ronald then gave his son some Kool-Aid to wash away the taste. Almost immediately, Tim began to complain that his stomach hurt and ran to the bathroom, where he began vomiting and convulsing. Ronald would later sob as he told the story of holding Tim while he was vomiting and as the child collapsed unconscious into his arms. Timothy O'Brien died en route to the hospital less than an hour after consuming the candy. When Detective Bill Lanier saw Tim on the stretcher in the emergency room, the image of Tim would sear itself into his brain. He saw a little boy, dead, foaming at the mouth. What did I say about making 2 margaritas? Better drink up. Immediately, it became clear to the examiners that Tim had been poisoned. They were immediately able to determine cyanide poisoning from the distinct almond smell. There was so much cyanide, it turns out, that had the Deer Park ambulance attendant David Malone given Tim mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in the ambulance, he himself would have been killed. Tim still had enough cyanide in his mouth to kill another person. Using information gleaned from Ronald and the medical staff, police officers knocked on doors all night long, collecting candy and having parents wake their children to make sure they were alive. The search uncovered 4 more lethal cyanide-laced pixie sticks. Whitney Parker, whom had been given the poison at the Bates' front door, was cutting open his pixie stick on the kitchen drain board when his father told him it was time for bed. Mark Bates had swung his pixie stick around and spilled some of the powder in the living room floor. His mother, frustrated, sent him to bed with no candy. The parents of one of the children became hysterical when they could not locate the candy after being notified by the police. They rushed upstairs to find their son asleep, holding the unconsumed candy. The boy had been unable to open the staples that sealed the tube shut. All 4 of the other children that had been given the pixie sticks were miraculously unharmed. All 5 of the pixie sticks had been opened, with the top 2 inches refilled with cyanide powder and resealed with a staple. According to a pathologist who had tested the pixie sticks, the candy eaten by Tim contained enough cyanide to kill 2 adults, while the other 4 candies contained enough to kill 3 to 4 adults. Panicked parents around the Houston area began to turn in their children's Halloween candy to police offices. One police station had enough candy to fill an entire room. Parents across the nation were terrified. Timothy O'Brien was buried, and Ronald sang a moving solo at his funeral ceremony. He told media, quote, "I have my peace in knowing Tim is in heaven now," end quote. The evening after the ceremony, Ronald was frustrated that Elizabeth and Daneen, who were grief-stricken and exhausted, didn't want to stay up and watch a recording of his solo yet again. But generally, the public's sympathy was firmly with the O'Brien family. So now it had to be determined. Where did the children get the poisoned pixie sticks? Already some investigators were feeling doubtful about the grieving father. Deer Park Police Lieutenant W.P. Best would say, quote, "You just knew something was wrong. I was always looking for his emotions. He seemed too cool, calm, and collected for a parent who had just lost a child," end quote. In being questioned, Ronald at first gave some vague street names, but said he really couldn't remember where he'd gotten the pixie sticks. This increased suspicions because the families had only taken their children to homes on 2 streets because of the rain. And, as it turns out, none of the homes they had visited had given out pixie sticks. After walking the neighborhood with police 3 times, Ronald led them to the home where no one had answered the door and said the owner of the home did not turn the lights on, but did crack the door open and hand him the 5 pixie sticks. He claimed he only saw the man's arm, which he described as hairy. It turns out that house was owned by a Courtney Melvin. Courtney was an air traffic controller at Hobby Airport in Houston and did not get home from work until 11 p.m. on Halloween night, hence the turned-off porch lights. Nearly 200 people confirmed that he had been at work, so he was rightfully ruled out as a suspect. Oh, the tangled web we weave. On Monday, November 4th, Pasadena police received a call from a Galena Park insurance agent who told them that Ronald had paid cash for two $20,000 life insurance policies for Elizabeth and Tim on October 3rd. He did this without Danine's knowledge. On the morning after Timothy's death, Ronald had called his insurance company to ask them about collecting the policies he had taken out on his son. Turns out that Ronald was also $100,000 in debt, which equates to about $544,000 in today's money. He also had a very difficult time keeping a job, having held 21 jobs in 10 years. He was also suspected of stealing from his job at Texas State Optical and was close to being fired. He had defaulted on several bank loans, the family home was being foreclosed on, and his car was about to be repossessed. In short, it seems he was pretty desperate. In a 3-hour police interview, Detective Sergeant David Mulliken caught Ronald in lie after lie, from how much he'd purchased in life insurance on the children to his work history, and he became convinced that Tim's murderer was sitting right across the table from him. Throughout the repeated police interviews, Ronald maintained his innocence. When police told Danine that they believed he was guilty, all they had to do was to tell her about those life insurance policies. She said, "Oh my God," as she broke down. She immediately knew. The circumstantial evidence kept pouring in. Police learned that Ronald had visited a chemical supply store in Houston to buy cyanide shortly before Halloween 1974. He left without purchasing anything after learning the smallest amount available to purchase was 5 pounds. Ronald Clark O'Brien was arrested for Timothy O'Brien's murder on November 5th, 1974. He was indicted on 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. Ronald entered a plea of not guilty to all 5 counts. The trial began in Houston on May 5th, 1975. The testimony against Ronald was unceasing. Customers from Texas State Optical, as well as friends, reported that Ronald had casual conversations with them about a new, unusual interest in cyanide and would ask how much cyanide was needed to kill a person. The funeral director said Ronald asked for 6 copies of the death certificate on November 1st and said his son died of potassium cyanide poisoning. A chemist who was an acquaintance of Ronald testified that in the summer of 1973, he contacted him about cyanide and how much would be fatal. He'd been planning this for some time. A chemical supply salesman also testified that Ronald had asked him how to purchase cyanide. And, in case you haven't drained your entire drink yet, Ronald's sister and brother-in-law testified that on the day of Tim's funeral, he talked about using the money from the insurance policy to take a long vacation. Danine herself testified, saying that Tim had not chosen the pixie stick, because seriously, who chooses a pixie stick as the one piece of candy they get to eat that night? Come on. But instead, she said Ronald had forced Tim to choose the pixie stick. Ronald, it appears, didn't have much of a defense. They mainly stuck to the decades-old urban legend concerning that mad poisoner who hands out poison-laced Halloween candy or hands out apples with razor blades stuck inside. I guess they hoped the urban legends, which are actually based on 0 facts other than this case, would persist with the jury. They were wrong. On June 3rd, 1975, a jury took 46 minutes to find Ronald Clark O'Brien guilty of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. The jury took 71 minutes to sentence him to death by electrocution. If you're wondering, that's not very much time. Ronald was confined to the Ellis 1 unit near Huntsville, Texas. Ronald was shunned and despised by his fellow death row inmates for killing his own child, and was absolutely friendless, according to a former chaplain for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, Reverend Carol Pickett. The inmates actually petitioned to hold a demonstration on Ronald's execution date to express their hatred of him. What does it say about you if you can't even find a friend on death row? Narcissistic personality disorder is classified as a cluster B personality disorder, alongside antisocial and histrionic disorders. Narcissistic personality disorder, formerly known as megalomania, affects 1% of the population. There is no genetic predisposition to it, and it is more common in men than in women. The causes are hotly debated, but not fully determined. 9 characteristics of narcissistic personality disorder are: 1. Belief that one is special and unique. 2. An exaggerated sense of self-importance. 3. A constant willingness to take advantage of others to achieve their own goals. 4. Requiring excessive admiration from others. 5. Preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success and power. 6. Sense of entitlement with unreasonable expectations from others. 7. Lack of empathy and unwillingness to identify with others' feelings. 8. Envy of others and beliefs that others envy them. 9. Arrogant or haughty attitude. One of our previous killers had an official diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, BTK. I believe that BTK and Ronald O'Brien definitely have some similarities. Again, I'm no psychologist, I just play one on a podcast. One must have 5 of the characteristics for a diagnosis, and based on Ronald's behavior both before and after the murder, I believe he fits the bill for at least 5 of the characteristics of narcissistic personality disorder. 1. Constant willingness to take advantage of others to achieve his own goals, all the way up to murder. 2. Requiring excessive admiration from others, going all the way up to wanting your wife to watch your solo of your son's funeral again to give you praise. 3. Lack of empathy and unwillingness to identify with others' feelings. Think this goes without saying if you kill your own son. 4. An exaggerated sense of self-importance. And 5. An arrogant or haughty attitude, both of which were observed during his questioning. This was not a defense strategy brought on by his defense counsel, since they decided to just make up fiction, and it wouldn't have spared Ronald's life anyway, but it's definitely worth exploring. So what do you think? Ronald declared his innocence from start to death penalty. Was he innocent? If he wasn't, how on earth does someone kill their own child and plot to kill several others for a few $1,000s? How does a person become that desperate? Or do you believe, as I do, that Ronald actually suffered from a personality disorder? Could mental illness be a contributing factor to his terrible decision? And what about you? Did your parents warn you about looking through your Halloween candy? Did you grow up with fears of razor blades and apples? And did you inspect your candy to make sure that it was completely sealed? Ronald and Dainine were divorced on November 17, 1976. She remarried and her husband adopted Elizabeth. If Timothy O'Brien were alive today, he would be 55 years old. Ronald Clark O'Brien's attorneys managed to snag him several appeals and stays of execution, but they all failed. He maintained his innocence until the very end. On March 31st, 1984, shortly after midnight, O'Brien was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. By this time, the method of capital punishment had been updated from electrocution to lethal injection. A crowd of 300 demonstrators gathered outside the prison during the execution, cheering and yelling, "Trick or treat." Anti-death penalty demonstrators were showered with candy. Ronald had a lot to say, even at the very end. His last words were, quote, "What is about to transpire in a few moments is wrong. However, we as human beings do make mistakes and errors. The execution is one of those wrongs, yet doesn't mean our whole system of justice is wrong. Therefore, I would forgive all who have taken part in any way in my death. Also, to anyone I have offended in any way during my 39 years, I pray and ask your forgiveness, just as I forgive anyone who offended me in any way. And I pray and ask God's forgiveness for all of us respectively as human beings. To my loved ones, I extend my undying love. To those close to me, know in your hearts I love you one and all. God bless you all, and may God's best blessings be always yours. Ronald C. O'Brien." See what I mean about narcissism. Thanks for hanging out with me. Remember, we've got Month of the Macabre going on here and on our social media. This week on TikTok, I've got 3 other short stories that have helped lead to the Halloween myth and, candy panic. As usual, I'll post these on Facebook and Instagram as well. If you haven't left a review on your podcast listening app, I'd be really grateful if you would. What really matters are the star ratings, so a short review is fine, but give me some good stars. Next week, we explore the black magic of Salem, Massachusetts, in some downright historical Halloween mayhem. The margarita? A little black magic, of course. I'll see you next week, and remember, there are always alternatives to murdering your own child for the insurance money.